So what was it about Marty?
Marty and I met when I was 17, he was 18. I was in college. Cornell was a preferred school for daughters. In those days, there was a strict quota for women. There were 4 men to every woman. So for parents, Cornell was the ideal place to send a girl. If she couldn't find her man there, she was hopeless. My first semester at Cornell, I never did a repeat date. But then I met Marty, and there was something amazingly wonderful about this man. He was the first boy I ever knew who cared that I had a brain. Most guys in the 50s didn't. One of the sadnesses about the brilliant girls who attended Cornell is that they kind of suppressed how smart they were. But Marty was so confident of his own ability, so comfortable with himself that he never regarded me as any kind of a threat.
We all were struck by the tremendous difference between Marty and Ruth. Marty was the most gregarious, outgoing life of the party. Ruth was really quite recessive in a way. Shy, quiet, soft voice. But they worked. They worked.
Oh, he's so young. Meeting Marty was by far the most fortunate thing that ever happened to me. Marty was a man blessed with a wonderful sense of humor. I tend to be rather sober.
Have my grandmotherly relationship with her, but also somewhat of a student and scholarly relationship to her as well now. She taught me that the way to win an argument is not to yell, because often that will turn people away more so than bringing them to your table.
You know, this was the 200th year of Harvard. So it took 200 years for us to, we were the first class that was 50-50 women. Mm-hmm. So 50% men, 50. We're the first class. It takes 200, yeah.
How did it feel to be one of 9 women in a class of over 500 men? You felt you were constantly on display. So if you were called on in class, you felt that if you didn't perform well, you were failing not just for yourself, but for all women.
American antitrust.
Harvard was a Socratic method, so that the professor would ask a question and then you would be called on to answer. The way it worked with women was they didn't call on us. I think they were afraid we would sort of wither if we were subjected to that kind of questioning.
When I was sent to check a periodical in Lamont Library in the old periodical room, there was a man at the door and he said, "You can't come in." "Oh, why can't I? Because you're a female." There was nothing I could say. This was a university employee that you can't come into that room.
When I get to Harvard Law School and I'm really intimidated the first year, and Marty is saying, "Oh, my wife, she's going to be on the law review." And there was a woman in the class ahead of mine. She said, "This husband of yours is boasting that you're going to be on the law review. You look like a little twerp."
To make the law review in those days, you had to be in the top 25 academically of 530, 540. Her second year, she makes the law review. So the mere fact marked her as something special.
It turned out that I did very well the first year, and I attribute it to having something very important in my life that wasn't the law books. I came to Harvard as the mother of a 14-month-old child. I go to school, study as hard as I can in a very concentrated way. I didn't waste any time. 4 o'clock in the afternoon, our babysitter left, and that was my child's hours till she went to sleep. Playing with my daughter gave me a respite from the kind of work I was doing at law school, and I think made me more sane.
We knew that Marty was ill. We just knew he had his own battle, and Ruth is now caring for both Marty and Jamie.
Marty, in his 3rd year of law school, had a virulent cancer. And days when there was no chemotherapy, there was only massive radiation. He'd go for the radiation, wake up about midnight when the only food that he ate for the day he could manage. And then I started typing the notes that his classmates had given me from his classes, reading whatever cases I would read for the next day, and maybe I got 2 hours sleep.
She did her own work, helped her husband with his work, organized his friends so they could help him with his work, and took care of her 2-year-old child. Fortunately, Marty lived, but it's when she learned how to burn the candle at both ends.
One of the memories from my childhood would be waking up in the middle of the night. Their mom would be spread out over the dining room table with her legal pads and the coffee at one hand and the box of prunes at the other.
She will work until 2, 3, 4, 5 in the morning, sometimes even later. Then she will get up. She has a sitting. She would have to be at the court before 9. And then she sleeps the entire weekend. So she catches up.
The sweet thing about working for a justice who works extremely hard is that we saw Marty come to our chambers often to lure her home. He would say, "Ruth, it's time to come home for dinner." She sometimes had to be physically brought home.
Marty graduated from the Harvard Law School and was going to a firm in New York. That was when Ruth finished her 2nd year. Given Marty, given his recent illness, they had to remain together, and the logical place was New York, and the best option was Columbia.
When I graduated from Columbia Law School in 1959, not a law firm in the entire city of New York would employ me.
4 of us from my class, Marty's class, went to the same law firm. And 2 of us went to the hiring department and said, we had somebody on the Harvard Law Review that we think is the cat's meow. We think this firm should hire her. As soon as I used the she pronoun, the senior partner looked at me and says, "Young man, you don't seem to understand. This firm doesn't hire women."
She hadn't quite figured out why it was that there were these barriers.
It wasn't until later that this all came together and became her life's work in fighting these injustices.
Being a woman was an impediment.
We did not have equal rights and equal recognition in the law at all.
There were not hundreds, but thousands of state and federal laws all over this country that discriminated on the basis of gender.
Typical laws of the time, like the husband is the master of the community. He shall choose where the family will live, and the woman is obliged to follow him.
There's no aspect of American life in which you were not treated differently.
The idea was that men were the breadwinners that counted, and women were pin money earners. So that women woke up and complained.
You're gonna rise up singing.
There came to be such a mass and a majority of women, really, who understood that they were not crazy. The system was crazy.
Now, thanks to the spirit of equality in the air, I no longer accept society's judgment that my group is second class.
But marching and demonstrating just wasn't Ruth's thing. Her thing was to use the skills she had and put them to work. And those were her legal skills.
1963, she started at Rutgers as a law professor.
And really inspired by her students, she agreed to teach a course in this new subject of gender and law.
The emergence of a women's rights movement had the possibility of playing the role in the 1970s that the Black civil rights movement had played in the 1960s. And so I was particularly eager to create a special project dealing with women's rights.
I got a call from the ACLU asking me if I would consider running the Women's Rights Project with Professor Ruth Bader Ginsburg, whom I had heard of, but I did not know. I met Ruth the first day I was there. She seemed very polite and quiet and reserved, not a firebrand.
She wouldn't speak up a great deal during meetings. She always addressed whatever point there was. There wasn't any peripheral element of it.
No small talk.
No small talk. None that I can recall.
At that point in time, Ruth was developing her philosophy to take cases that would make good law. If the case is going to be on its way to the Supreme Court, we wanted to be involved and we wanted to, frankly, take over the case.
She was following in the footsteps of the great civil rights lawyer Thurgood Marshall, who was the architect of the battle for racial equality, basing it on the clause of the Constitution that guarantees equal protection of the law. She wanted it to apply to equal protection for women.
First argument before the U.S. Supreme Court was in Frontiero v. Richardson.
I was way back in the 1970s, second lieutenant in the Air Force. I went in the military because I needed the money.
Who says a woman has to settle for a routine job just because she's a woman? Discover the United States Air Force, and you'll discover the world.
I was newly out of college. This was a new job. I had just married, so it was the start of new everything. It became clear pretty quickly that the men I was working with who were married got a housing allowance, and I wasn't getting paid a housing allowance because I was a woman. I assumed it was a mistake. So I went off to the pay office to correct the mistake. You're lucky we let you in here at all. You're lucky that the Air Force allows you to serve, was what I heard right off the bat. And it took me aback, and then I figured, well, here's one bigot, so I'll just keep asking around. And it became very clear very quickly that there was no different story.
So we went to see a lawyer, and I still thought it was a matter of getting a lawyer to write a letter for me. The lawyer said to me, "This isn't an administrative error. This is the law, and it's going to have to be rectified with a lawsuit. And if you're willing, we'll take you on."
Ruth and I heard about it and immediately let the lawyer for Sharon Frontiero know we were interested. It was very important to us to have a part in that case.
There was the sense, and there still is the sense, that nice girls don't speak up. Nice girls don't make demands. Well, too bad. It went to the district court in Alabama. We lost, and the next court to go to was the Supreme Court.
Ruth and I set to work to write the brief. What we wanted was a review of cases that the court would say sex discrimination doesn't work. And it would be a broad command, basically, to legislatures to get rid of statutes that discriminate on the basis of gender. But she also added, to make the point much more poignant, the history of women and the way we were treated throughout America and its beginnings. She captured for the male members of the court what it was like to be a second-class citizen.
Frontiero went to the court. Ruth Ginsburg, for the first time, made an oral argument. She split her time with the lawyer, the man who had begun the case in Alabama.
It's very intense and austere and important and very male, and it's the whole thing feels like. I was really kind of scared. We sat down at the council table, and the court began with the oyez, oyez, and here we are.
Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay. All persons having business before the Supreme Court of the United States are admonished to draw near and give their attention, for the court is now sitting.
Mrs. Ginsburg?
I was terribly, terribly nervous, but then I looked up at the justices and I thought, I have a captive audience. I knew that I was speaking to men who didn't think there was any such thing as gender-based discrimination. And my job was to tell them it really exists.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court. Women today face discrimination in employment as pervasive and more subtle than discrimination encountered by minority groups. Sex classifications imply a judgment of inferiority. The sex criterion stigmatizes when it is used to protect women from competing for higher-paying jobs, promotions. It assumes that all women are preoccupied with home and children. These distinctions have a common effect. They help keep woman in her place, a place inferior to that occupied by men in our society.
There was not a single question. I just went on speaking, and I, at the time, wondered, are they just indulging me and not listening? Or am I telling them something they haven't heard before? And are they paying attention?
The justices were just glued to her. I don't think they were expecting to have to deal with something as powerful as a sheer force of her argument that was just all-encompassing. And they were there to talk about a little statute in the government code. I mean, it was just, we seized the moment to change American society.
In asking the court to declare sex a suspect criterion, we urge a position forcibly stated in 1837 by Sarah Grimke, noted abolitionist and advocate of equal rights for men and women. She said, "I ask no favor for my sex.
All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks."
We're told about the decision when a reporter called us up and said it went in your favor today. How do you feel? I said, I feel fine. Thank you very much.
We were both happy that we won the case. I mean, let's be clear about it. We won the case, but we lost the standard of review that we wanted by one vote.
She tried to make the case that sex discrimination should be treated like race discrimination. 4 justices signed on to that idea. The problem was you need 5.
I said, it's too soon. My expectation, to be candid, was that I would repeat that kind of argument maybe half a dozen times. I think generally in our society, real change, enduring change, happens one step at a time.
She is very disciplined, but she has passions that she really enjoys. She loves the opera.
She goes to multiple opera festivals and the whole family will go with her. I think it is a place of tranquility that is outside of the demands of her job.
When I am at an opera, I get totally carried away. I don't think about the case that's coming up next week or the brief that I'm in the middle of. I am overwhelmed by the beauty of the music, the drama, and the sound of the human voice. It's like an electric current going through me. Justice and mercy, they're all in opera. Very grand emotions.
A young man had a tragic experience. His wife had an entirely healthy pregnancy, and he was told that he had a healthy baby boy, but his wife had died.
The problem was amniotic embolism, and at that particular point, nobody had ever survived that. They did keep her alive for about 4 hours, but by 3:30 in the afternoon, the code blue came along and she died. Jason was a very easy child. My attitude toward raising a child is that a child is not there for me, I'm there for him. And that's what my job was.
He determined that he was going to be a caregiving parent to that child. He went to the local Social Security office and asked about the benefits that he thought a sole surviving parent could get. And he was told that that benefit is called a mother's benefit. And he didn't qualify. So he wrote a letter to the editor of his local newspaper and he said, I've heard a lot about women's lib. Let me tell you my story.
To the editor, it has been my misfortune to discover that a male cannot collect Social Security benefits as a woman can. Had I been paying into the Social Security system and had I died, she would have been able to receive a benefit. But male homemakers cannot. I wonder if Gloria Steinem knows about this.
Ruth took a case in which a man was discriminated against in order to show the depth and the importance of sex discrimination. Very intelligent thing to do.
We appeared at the United States Supreme Court in 1975. When we got to the courtroom, she sat me down at the table with her. She just wanted a male presence to be at that table so the justices would have something to identify with. That was part of her strategy.
She's trying to convince members of the Supreme Court, who were mostly white, male, privileged class at that time.
Mr. Chief Justice, and may it please the court, for the 8 months immediately following his wife's death, Stephen Wiesenfeld did not engage in substantial gainful employment. Instead, he devoted himself to the care of Jason Paul.
She knew exactly what she was doing, and it was a very shrewd strategy.
That case resulted in a unanimous judgment in Stephen Wiesenfeld's favor. His case was the perfect example of how gender-based discrimination hurts everyone.
Ruth's conception of the strategy led to a whole string of litigation for the next decade.
She wanted to build the idea of women's equality step by step.
It was like knitting a sweater.
The point is that the discriminatory line almost inevitably hurts women. Female citizens of Louisiana are denied equal protection by the total absence of their peers from the jury.
I thought the new theory was that there's very little difference between men and women, and so why wouldn't the men's jury be their
Well,
peers?
I'm not aware of that new theory.
They didn't get it. They didn't understand the issues that women were facing, or they didn't see them as issues. Because women had, in their minds, women had a place, and it wasn't where Ruth Ginsburg was suggesting that it ought to be.
Men and women are persons of equal dignity, and they should count equally before the law.
You won't settle for putting Susan B. Anthony on the new dollar.
When they would say things like this, how did you respond?
Well, never in anger, as my mother told me. That would have been self-defeating. Always as an opportunity to teach. I did see myself as kind of a kindergarten teacher in those days because the judges didn't think sex discrimination existed. Well, one of the things I tried to plant in their minds was think about how you would like the world to be for your daughters and granddaughters.
The gender line helps to keep women not on a pedestal, but in a cage.
You couldn't miss what Ruth was doing during the 70s.
She was creating a legal landscape.
She was doing something that was incredibly important to American women, whether they knew it or not.
Just the thought that I might catch a glimpse of her is overwhelming. I have a mug of her in my room. It says Herstory in the Making.
I have her sticker on my computer. And I just ordered tons of merch.
Notorious RBG.
Yes, the
We're here
Notorious
to get
RBG,
our book signed.
I think it's easy to take for granted the position that young women can have in today's society, and that's a lot in thanks to Justice Ginsburg's work.
Who is more disdained or told to go away than an older woman? But here's an older woman who people really want to hear everything that she has to say.